Hello, everybody. I have unmuted myself and we're about to get started. This is going to move quickly, but I want to leave time for questions and some discussion at the end. So let me share my screen and we will get started. And my email address is here on the first slide if anybody wants to write to me or have any additional questions. So please feel free to write to me. I want to begin. The last lecture was really set in the 19th century, and this one, I want to connect the 19th century more explicitly to what's going on today. And so what I really want to talk about is some issues that sisters are engaged in today and talk about their 19th century roots. Advocating and negotiating for their sisters is nothing new among the leadership of women religious. And I just wanted to highlight one example of Mother Xavier Ross, who is the founder of the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth in Kansas. She was originally sent by the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth. She was originally sent by the Sisters of Charity of Nazareth to open a hospital in Nashville. And when it was discovered that the pastor who had invited them had bilked some of his parishioners out of their funds to build the hospital, he disappeared, left them with the debt, and Bishop Miles of Nashville refused to acknowledge and pay for the money that was owed. Mother Xavier went to a regional meeting of bishops in St. Louis, said, I have a bunch of trained teachers and nurses who will invite me to your diocese to engage in ministry there, but I want to make sure that you're going to treat us right. And Bishop Meege of Kansas responded to her, and that's where the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth started out. I think it's a wonderful story, and it's not unique. Neither is anti-racism a 20th century phenomenon. I don't have a picture of Sister Herlinda Sick, who was a German immigrant school sister of Notre Dame, but we've all probably heard of Father Augustine Tolton, who was the first acknowledged African-American Catholic priest in the United States. What is less well known is that Sister Herlinda welcomed him into her parochial school classroom when he was a 6-year-old runaway slave with his mother in Quincy, Illinois. Later, when he needed to learn Greek and Latin in order to attempt to go to seminary, she taught them to him, even though she had to learn these things for herself. And later, she helped to build a parish for him to return to in Chicago, St. Monica's, and spent the rest of her life engaging in ministry with the African-American community. She designed her own ministry in days when that was certainly not common. And to the credit of her community leaders, they encouraged her to do this. Here's Sister Margaret Ellen Traxler, a 20th century school sister of Notre Dame, marching for civil rights. She took part in the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, and she's incidentally my godmother, so of course I had to include her. But she had never heard of Sister Herlinda, and I said, well, you have a foremother in your community, and she was thrilled to find out about her. Unfortunately, there are no surviving pictures of Sister Herlinda, and here are more sisters, of course, marching for civil rights. Sisters on the Frontier collected money to finance their hospitals and their other ministries, and they also sold health insurance. We think of health insurance as a 20th century phenomenon, but sisters would go to mining camps, logging camps, railroad construction sites, and they would sell tickets for anywhere from $5 to $10 to raise money to build their hospitals. And then if a person got injured or got sick, they could bring one of these tickets to a hospital run by that community and receive health care for the following year. It's the first example of health care that I've been able to find, health insurance in the United States. And it was created by Catholic sisters in the early to mid 19th century. Here's a copy of a certificate of that sort from the Sisters of St. Benedict in Jonesboro, Arkansas. They charged $9, so it must have been relatively late in the 19th century. And of course, we have Sister Carol Keehan, who was president of the Catholic Health Association and who supported the ratification, the passage of the Affordable Care Act. Here's President Obama thanking her. But she had 4 mothers too, and we shouldn't forget about them. Sisters have been in court for a long, long time. Probably one of the most famous cases is that of Pierce versus Society of Sisters, the Sisters of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary in the state of Oregon, which passed a law in the 19 teens prohibiting people from attending private schools. They said every child in the state of Oregon must attend a public school. The sisters were subject to a lawsuit because they refused to close their schools, and they actually won their lawsuit, and the sisters were allowed to continue to teach in private schools. And this was seen as both an upholding of the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the right to privacy, and the right to free choice. And this case, ironically, was cited in support of the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. Sisters continue to go to court. Here's a picture of the Little Sisters of the Poor, who of course went to court and successfully won the right not to have to provide contraceptive aid to their employees. Sisters, of course, have been educational pioneers. Here's a picture of some sisters at Sisters College at Catholic University of America. And of course, this was a site of great intercommunity cooperation and collaboration. Another educational pioneer was Sister Mary Kenneth Keller of the Blessed Virgin, the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the BVMs in Iowa, who was the first person, not woman, not sister, but person in the United States to receive a PhD in computer science in 1965. She was truly a pioneer. There were pioneers in other realms as well. Sister Ignatia Gavin of the Sisters of Charity of St. Augustine in Ohio was one of the co-founders of the Alcoholics Anonymous. And you may know that when people reach milestones in their journey of recovery in Alcoholics Anonymous, they receive coins. They receive a coin at 30 days, at 1 year, at 5 years, and so on. And those coins were actually initiated by Sister Ignatia, who, when she started working with alcoholics and demanding that their affliction be recognized not as sin and not as self-indulgent, but as an illness, she would give them holy medals to keep them going and encourage them. And those were the basis of the coins that members of Alcoholics Anonymous receive to this day. Sisters have also always been involved in politics, although we think of that as being something relatively recent. Angela Gillespie was the first cousin of James G. Blaine, who ran for president as a Republican in 1884. They lived together in the same household when they were small children. She campaigned for him. She wrote to all her friends and said she was praying for him, although she couldn't, of course, vote. And her connection with politicians in Ohio, not just James G. Blaine, who eventually moved to Maine and was a senator from there, but people like Senator John Sherman of Ohio. Her connection with all of these individuals was one of the reasons why the Sisters of the Holy Cross ended up opening a number of schools in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. It was through her connections with the political community there. One of my favorite sister politicians, though, is Margaret Susan. Margaret Susan is the founder of the Sisters of Social Service in Hungary. And she was also, while a sister, elected as a member of the Hungarian parliament in 1920. She remained engaged in politics and ministry in the public sector for the rest of her life. She later moved to the United States and in fact died in the city of Buffalo, New York, where her sisters are still active today. We know, of course, in the United States, another sister of social service as being more associated with politics than Margaret Susan, but she is walking in the footsteps of her founder. And that is, of course, Sister Simone Campbell, who for many years was the executive director of Network, celebrating its 50th anniversary this month, and also, of course, the creator of the idea of the nuns on the bus, who were traveling to campaign for a variety of political and social actions in accord with Catholic social teaching. So she was walking very much in the footsteps of her founder, Margaret Susan. Nuns have been at political conventions. We had Deirdre Burns at the 2020 Republican Convention, and Simone Campbell herself at the 2012 and 2020 Democratic conventions, both of them speaking publicly. I'm talking about Deirdre Burns as well as Simone Campbell because it's important to realize that sisters are individuals. They don't all agree on everything, and they don't all share the same political agendas or the same spirituality. And that's important to remember and to appreciate the diversity and the complexity of religious dedication. So sisters have been lobbying since at least 1972. Last weekend was the big 50th anniversary celebration of the founding of Network. And we have a picture of the early sisters who helped to organize Network, and then 3 of its executive directors. Sisters have lobbied their own church. Here's Theresa Kane in 1978, speaking on behalf of women who seek ordination in the Catholic Church when Pope John Paul II was offering Mass at the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. This was a Mass explicitly for sisters. And as president of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, Theresa Kane was deputized to greet him, which she did. And she told him that he should open up the church to all ministries for women. Of course, and importantly, sisters have organized in many ways on their own behalf. Here's the sister formation movement pioneers. First, we have Sister Madaleva Wolf, who wrote a book on the education of Sister Lucy, in which she called for the enhanced education of Catholic sisters. Also at her college, the College of St. Mary's in Indiana, she began the first graduate program in theology in the United States to be open to Catholic women. The woman in the center is a Sister of St. Joseph, Annette Walters. Next to her is Rita Mary Bradley, and the 2 of them for many years were involved in leading the sister formation movement. But the movement in many ways owes its existence to its first director, Sister Mary Emil Penna, IHM. And what I think is really interesting here is that we've got 4 sisters from 4 different communities, and that they all collectively, along with, of course, many, many other sisters at the local and regional levels, who advocated for and brought about the enhanced education, not only in professional subjects, but also in theology and spirituality for American Catholic sisters. In 1954, the Conference of Major Superiors of Women, now called the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, was founded. The woman on the top here is Sister Mary Gerald Berry, who was the first president of CMSW. And here is an early meeting of the membership of CMSW. And you can see from it that there were sisters from a wide variety of congregations coming together to meet, to collaborate, to talk about the future of religious life, and to work together. The woman on the lower left, at least as I see it, is, of course, Sister Mary Luke Tobin, Sister of Loretto, who was an auditor at the Second Vatican Council, and who, as president of LCWR, represented American Catholic sisters at the Second Vatican Council and transmitted news and also spoke out on behalf of the interests and the concerns of women religious while she was there. I couldn't go any further without talking about the first crisis, because this is a talk on resistance as well as on activism. And the first crisis in modern times was really that of the California IHMs, with their incredible conflict with and tensions with Cardinal McIntyre in Los Angeles. The picture of the two sisters that is presented here is of Anita Caspary, who was, of course, the president, the head of the community at the time of this crisis. And she is talking to Corita Kent, the legendary artist who was a California IHM. I wanted to introduce you, if you're not familiar with it, to the book that Anita Caspary wrote on this entire experience, Witness to Integrity. It's a remarkable book. It also contains a lot of primary source documents on what happened. And for the first time, we have a really complete account of what happened to that congregation in the 1960s. And I hope that many of you have had the opportunity to see the documentary that has been made on the California IHMs called Rebel Hearts. If you haven't, it is available to watch on Discovery Plus. And if you don't subscribe to Discovery Plus, which I don't, you can sign up for a 7-day free membership, and you can watch it while you have the free membership. And I see that somebody's got their hand raised, but we're going to wait for questions until the end, if you don't mind. Sisters of Mercy have been in public office as well, not just Margaret Schlachter, but here are two Sisters of Mercy who were in public office in the mid-1980s. Agnes Mary Mansour was the director of social services in the state of Michigan. And Arlene Violet was the first woman, again, not the first sister, the first woman elected attorney general in any state. She was attorney general of Rhode Island. Both of these sisters were given a choice. They could remain in their religious congregation, or they could remain in public office, but they could not do both. Agnes Mary Mansour reluctantly submitted her resignation from the Sisters of Mercy. They refused to accept it, although the Vatican apparently did. And she was regarded as a Sister of Mercy for the rest of her life, to the point where when she fell ill with cancer, she was nursed alongside the Sisters of Mercy themselves, and she died in their community regional house and is buried as a Sister of Mercy in their Detroit cemetery. The Vatican 24, there were actually 26, but who's counting? There may have been more, were among the many signers of an ad which appeared in the New York Times in 1984 during the presidential campaign, saying that there was a diversity of opinions regarding abortion among committed Catholics. All of the sisters were told that they risked being kicked out of their religious communities. It was one of the first cases, and I think people learned from the experience of the IHMs, where the leadership of all of their communities came together and worked together, the women who led the congregations, and none of the sisters were kicked out of their communities. 2 sisters left their congregation, but nobody was involuntarily removed from their religious communities. Here again is Margaret Traxler in the white shirt, who was one of the signers, and this is Sister Margaret Tuitt, Marjorie Tuitt, excuse me, who was a Dominican sister. In 1992, some sisters who were not happy with the direction that LCWR was taking, and events like the advocacy for the sisters who had signed the New York Times ad was part of it, but not the whole story, decided to form their own organization, which they called CMSWR, Consortium of Major Superiors of Women Religious. And it's a name similar to, but not identical to, the original name of LCWR. And this made the United States the only country, I believe, in the world that has 2 umbrella organizations for Catholic sisters that are recognized by the Vatican. Almost all the sisters in CMSWR wear habits. One of the requirements for being a member is that sisters wear a visible sign of their consecration. There's at least one community that has never worn a habit, which is a member of CMSWR, but almost all the other communities do wear full habits. And what I'm going to be doing now is showing some photographs of CMSWR and LCWR side by side to kind of talk about the differences between them and the different understandings of power and decision-making in these 2 organizations. One, I think, has a more quantitative rather than qualitative understanding. And also, I think it's fair to say that CMSWR has a more hierarchical versus more collegial or collaborative organization structure that we see with LCWR. And we see these in the pictures that I'm about to show. So here are 2 parallel pictures. The one of CMSWR has the sisters sitting in rows, listening to a priest address them. The LCWR group is praying in a circular and spiral organization, and there are no men present. Here's a picture from the LCWR Assembly in 2012 of the members marching for environmental justice. You can see signs about wetlands and protecting wetlands. And here is a picture the following year of some sisters attending CMSWR. Here's a picture of the CMSWR Assembly in 2014, again being addressed by a priest, sitting at tables, taking notes. And here is a picture the same year of LCWR at their annual assembly. Again, the tables are circular and conversation is being had at all tables. At that session of LCWR, that annual meeting, Elizabeth Johnson gave a keynote address. And here's one of the things that she said. I grew committed to bringing women's voices to the table. It means using the human dignity of women as one lens through which we think about other religious and ethical subjects. It means attending to poverty, lack of education, sexual violence, and other injustices that ruin women's lives. It means employing theologically what promotes the flourishing of women in all of their diversity. And what impressed me about this statement was its comprehensive and holistic understanding of women's voices and of feminism. Poverty, lack of education, sexual violence, and other injustices. And using theology as a lens to promote the flourishing of women in all their diversity. That year, Sister Nancy Schreck was president of LCWR. And some of her words from her presidential address are, I think, an effective way to end my formal remarks and to leave time, more time than I did last time, to answer questions and for us to have conversation. So in this address, she said, I grew committed to bringing women's voices to the table. It means using the human dignity. Oh, this is Elizabeth Johnson. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Here we are. As we spend these next days reflecting, I would like to start our explorations by reminding us all that not all revelation comes with light, but that we have a long biblical history of God working with people in the mystery of darkness. The problem is that we've associated darkness with evil and created a sense of fear around it, thus seeking to avoid the experience. The poet Mary Oliver wrote, "Someone I love once gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift." Thank you.
Mary Grace, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So wonderful and expansive. I was just wondering if you also had, well, I did have a question about being an former Adrian Dominican. I was thinking it was Sister Gerald Berry.
Yes, what did I say?
Oh, you said Mary Jo somebody.
No, I didn't. I hope I didn't.
Okay, so thank you.
Sister Gerald Berry, yes.
And then I was just wondering if in your research you had come across Sister Donna Quinn.
Oh yes, I knew Donna Quinn quite well. In fact, she died about a year ago, I believe.
Mm-hmm. And she made wonderful contributions in the Chicago area to the formation.
Right, and she has a very interesting book on Chicago Catholic women, which I think is worth reading. And she, of course, was also a member of the Vatican 24 who signed that New York Times ad. So yes, I'm very familiar. She was a Cincinnati Dominican.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, very interesting woman. I knew her for about 35 years. So yeah.
A delightful person, and you never had to worry about what was on her mind.
No, she was a tough one, and a very loving person. A very loving person. Somebody asked in the chat whether I could put the quotes in the chat. Unfortunately, I can't copy them and paste them from my PowerPoint. But what I will do is I will send them after we're done to Russ and to Deb, and they can maybe send them out when they send out the prayer.
Great, we can do that.
Right?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
thanks, Kathy. Okay, let's go back to Kathy. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's working now. That's great. I kept pressing it. Hi, Peggy. That was so interesting. Thank you so much. I loved it. I guess my question is, I was at Jonah House a couple of times, and with our Death Platt and Carol Gilbert, and like, what's their place in sort of history? Because they're kind of, I don't know if they're operating with their congregations, their larger congregations, or
are you talking about Jonah House in Baltimore?
Yeah, I'm talking about that, and you know, they were their resistance, their nuclear resistance, that would ultimately.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and of course we have a lot of sisters who have committed acts of civil disobedience.
Yeah.
And what I think has been, I remember reading about the Sisters of Loretto, who were one of the first communities to come up with a policy of how to respond when a sister commits an act of civil disobedience or takes a position like Donna Quinn, who was openly pro-choice, that not all the community might agree with.
Mhm.
And what most communities have done is come up with a policy of standing by the sisters, acting out of conscience, even if not all members of the congregation necessarily share their position. That we stand with a sister, we know she has come to this decision carefully and prayerfully, and we stand by her right to do that without necessarily standing with her in that position. And I think that's true of some of the sisters, like Ardith and so forth, who lived at Jonah House. I had the privilege of visiting Jonah House. What you may or may not know is that the Bergens are from Syracuse, New York, which is where I am.
Oh, there you go then.
Jerry
may have ended up there, but
Jerry Bergen was a member of my parish till he died.
Oh,
And the last time I saw Dan Bergen was at his funeral.
Yeah.
So
I just found Jonah House so inspiring, and their work there so inspiring. I thought it was interesting that Our Death shows up in Orange is the New Black, if anyone's read the book.
Right.
So she's in popular culture a little bit, but anyway, thank you very much.
Right, and Chris Wood put in the chat, hi Chris, that they had the blessing of their congregation. And I think that's true of a lot of sisters who have taken controversial positions. And again, the expectation is not that every sister in the congregation agrees with the position they took, but they agree with their right to act on a basis of conscience.
Wonderful, thank you.
Great, thanks, Kathy. Let's go to Margaret Bannon.
Yes, thank you, Margaret, for your presentation. I was just wondering, throughout your research, were you ever overwhelmed by the fact that throughout that history, women's place was in the home? Were you overwhelmed by the fact that these women were able to leave their homes, set up their own businesses, earn their own income, and take care of themselves and build their own establishments? Were you ever kind of, wow, how did that happen?
Well, I mean, I wasn't overwhelmed, but I was certainly impressed. I mean, one of the things is that these sisters were the first female corporate executives in the United States, because their communities and many of their institutions were incorporated, and they were the officers of those corporations. I approach this as a historian of women and not as a Catholic historian. So my background is as a political historian and as a social historian of the United States. So I came to this subject not through the church, but through women's history. And I see these women not necessarily as feminists. I found very few feminists in the 19th century, but as kind of proto-feminists, as women who acted, they were strong, they were determined, they were courageous. I don't think they had quite the systemic understanding that we understand today as being sort of the foundation of feminism, but they certainly were the foremothers. And so I find their stories fascinating, utterly fascinating. And I believe that you are not from the United States.
No, Australia.
I thought you were from Australia. And I will just say, I've tried to read as much as I could about Australian religious life and its history. And I think the parallels between Australia and the United States are much closer than any two other countries for lots of reasons. And maybe someday we can have a conversation about that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Let's go to another Margaret, Margaret Allen.
I don't know if it's Margaret or Sue who wants to speak, but you're muted. I think they're getting up to unmute. They're in my community of IHM, so I know them. Hi. We can't hear you. There's no sound on your end, even though you're not muted. Why don't we go to one other person and come back to them?
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's try J5. So Sister Noel.
So I'm getting more aware of the issue of Indigenous people and land issues that maybe some of us took away from our Indigenous Americans. And one of the things that came up in our talk was that we need Sisters of the United States to sign petition to Rome about the document of discovery that has underlined taking land away when the first missionaries came into any country. And we as Sisters of St. Joseph are just looking at our history now, and a lot of other communities are doing that too. Have you done any studies on that, or we need as sisters?
I think that's a job for LCWR, frankly.
Is it? Yeah.
And because they can coordinate the activities of various congregations, I certainly think it's important. And frankly, I'm very proud of our local bishop here in Syracuse, because he became the first bishop in the United States to speak out on behalf of condemning and grappling with the legacy of the doctrine of discovery. I don't know him personally, but I was certainly very pleased to see when he took that position.
We were very aware that the Sisters of the United States have to take a lead in this, because our brothers are very reticent, since a lot of them are co-opted by the government of the United States.
Well, and I see that maybe it's Russ who put in the chat, somebody put in the chat that the Black Sisters Conference should play a major role in that effort.
Yes.
I think that's
Thank you for
true.
that. Thank you.
And also
Yep.
Las Hermanas, the Latina sisters.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sister Noel. Let us try Margaret again. Let's see if they figured
Margaret,
out
have you
their
figured out the sound thing?
microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
And this is
I'm
super
Susan.
cozy.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to recommend a book which probably some of you have read. It's Guests in Their Own House by Carmel Rickard, Irish
Carmel
sister. McEnroy, who interviewed some of the 23 women who were auditors at the Second Vatican Council. A couple were not available and a few had died. It's absolutely really fascinating. And Sister Mary Luke Tobin was an auditor, and she was a very creative auditor, because even though they were there officially, some of the cardinal chairs of the commissions would not let the women speak or even bring up ideas. But she found friendly bishops on those commissions. The commission that was writing the document on religious life had not a single woman advisor. The guys writing about it. So Guests in Their Own House.
It's a marvelous book. Thank you, Sue, for recommending it. I fully endorse your recommendation of that. It's an excellent book.
Great, thanks. Let's move to Marcy Fox.
What? Hi. First of all, Margaret, I am so impressed with your presentation. I can't tell you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Gosh. I was a Sister of Mercy for 20 years in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I wasn't here for your, I guess, did you give a talk last week?
I gave one on the 5th of April, and it is on the website of
it is.
Church, so you could look at it if you're interested.
Oh, good. I'm just wondering if you mentioned Mother Baptist Russell in your
I did not mention.
Oh my God, that woman.
Let me just say, I was in the film Going West on the Journey about the founding of the Sisters of Mercy of the Americas. And I've read Baptist Russell's biography, and she was a true pioneer. Yes. And the problem is, what some of you may not know, I did get a couple of emails after the first one, like, you didn't mention our community. You didn't mention this. There were 425 communities of sisters in the United States as of 1917. And so I couldn't mention them all, or we'd be here for several weeks, which I would love, but you would all probably get very bored.
Well,
you need to take meal breaks.
I just wanted to make one little comment about her, and it's not really published that much, is that she started San Francisco General Hospital, which is one of the preeminent hospitals in the world, in the country anyway, research hospitals. And she actually quit that because they wouldn't pay her. The San Francisco Board of Supervisors wouldn't
Well,
pay
you know,
her.
she
Anyway.
wasn't alone in that. The sisters, the Franciscan Sisters of Rochester, Minnesota, of course, founded the hospital that was the basis of the Mayo Clinic.
Yes.
We have a lot of sisters who were involved in medical pioneering efforts, and certainly she deserves recognition, and so do many, many others. Look for my book when it comes out. I just got a research leave today for 2023, and it will be out.
I can't wait. Okay, I don't want to take any more of your time, but thank you so much, Margaret, for this.
That was delightful.
It means a great deal to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marcy. Let's see. Rita Houlihan, you're next.
Hi, Rita.
Oh, hi. It's good to see you, Margaret.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for this wonderful historical perspective. I just wanted to add to your timeline. And I know you can't have every single thing, but I think it is remarkable that in 1947, Catherine Sullivan, a member of the Society of the Sacred Heart, the RSCJs, was the first woman admitted to the Catholic Biblical Association. And
thank you so much for that.
there's a wonderful Carolyn Ozick, who's also an RSCJ.
Yes,
wrote,
I know Lynn. I didn't know she
wrote
wonderful.
a biography of Catherine Sullivan. And the highlight I wanted to make is 2 points. One, Catherine Sullivan endeared herself to a group of Catholic biblical archaeologists who were meeting at Manhattanville, where she was a professor. And she accosted them basically and said, you know, you guys, you're just talking to yourselves. You talk in this jargon and you're just reaffirming what you all know, and you're not helping. The world needs the word of God. So she really, in 1941, 42 was pushing. And one of the priests who was a biblical scholar said, you know, and by then she had her PhD from Penn in history, because a woman couldn't get a PhD in theology, as you mentioned. And he said, I want to tutor you. They arranged this thing. She got the equivalent of a PhD, and by 47, she was admitted. And she became vice president. She was already writing journals. She started a biblical dictionary. She did all these things to make the Bible accessible. And then that is when I found this out, when I asked Lynn Ozick one day, I said, Lynn, how did you get started? How did you get so committed? And she said, Catherine Sullivan. And she wore herself out, talking around the world about access to the Bible and opening our eyes. And really, when you look at the feminist biblical scholarship, she's like she's just a bedrock of it. So, if you want to put one more timeline marker.
Oh my gosh, she is so important. And I will just say that Lynn Ozick herself really influenced an article of mine that will be coming out in the fall in Journal of Feminist Studies in Religion on sacraments as weapons, which she was a very important influence on that.
And then Lynn herself became the second woman president of the Catholic, Elizabeth Schuster. So, and where would we be without the witness of these women, without their penetration and saying, wait a minute. Like Sandra, why is it brothers? Because he's saying it's siblings, you know, like, why is it this? Think of all the women who have asked why and have, you know, said, wait, look at the Greek here. So anyhow, just wanted to give a shout out.
As I think Deborah has just put in the chat that Lynn was the one who suggested that I give this presentation, so I'm very grateful to her. She's
wonderful.
She's a wonderful woman. And she's fantastic. In the Zoom. So thank you, Lynn, wherever you are. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rita. Let's see here. We've got Hildegard Pleva.
Hi, Hilda.
Hi, Peggy. How are you?
I'm fine.
This is great fun. You knew I would enjoy this. I'd like to give you an opportunity to pitch another publication that you were involved in, advising the sisters in Monroe, the IHMs of Monroe, in the book that they wrote. I remember that the word friendship is in the title, but I can't remember the whole title.
Well, it's called Building Sisterhood.
Oh, Building Sisterhood. Great. It
has 2 chapters on friendship in it.
Yeah. And this is a very knowledgeable audience, but some may not be aware. I was particularly struck in that book about when you speak about the accomplishments on a business and administrative level of the sisters, of what they did in building their new mother house after the fire. And
in the midst of the Great Depression.
In the midst of the Great Depression, and the esteem that they created for themselves among the business and banking community there. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Well, I will just say that one of the great sister economists, Amata Miller, wrote the chapter on the building of the Mother House. Building Sisterhood is an interesting book. It was published by Syracuse University Press. I had nothing to do with that. But they had a series at that time on women and religion. And the interesting thing about it is it's the only, it was written as a feminist collective from a feminist perspective. So the chapters are thematic rather than chronological. It is still available, and it does not have an author because it was written by a collective. So you have to look for it by title, Building Sisterhood. And it's got some marvelous stuff in that book, marvelous stuff in that book. It's also got one of the few chapters I've ever seen in a history of sisters on mental illness in religious life.
They were very, very frank.
Yes.
And very, very frank, and yet very, very loving.
Yes.
But I remember the episode of them being approached to very visibly go to the bank.
Yes.
To deposit money when the banks were in great risk, because they were so held in such high regard in the community that their physical presence doing something, trusting in the banking system, was valued by the business community and banking community there. Very forward-looking.
Sure that happened elsewhere too.
Very forward-looking in their whole approach to religious life, because it went on, didn't it? Weren't they among the first? You see that their sisters got education in order to be prepared to teach.
Yes, and Mary Emil Penna, of course, was one of the founders of the sister formation movement.
Yeah. Well, thank
Great.
you. Thank you.
Thanks, Hilda. Let's see, Mary Ellen McCarthy, you're next.
You're still muted, I believe. You're muted, Mary Ellen.
Mary Ellen, I'm going to shoot you an invitation to unmute.
Yeah, it wasn't clicking. Just a comment in terms of the education of sisters. I had a wonderful education at Marylette College in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. And one of the best things about it is that there were people from all over the country and the world there. And it was, the quality of the education was terrific. And that was in the 60s. I don't know when they actually closed, but I had 2 years of a really excellent education there.
Well, I think I mentioned this in my talk earlier in the month, that, you know, all kinds of people have credited women's colleges for providing women with the education for leadership. And so many of those women's colleges were run by sisters. You know, we hear about the Seven Sisters and so forth, but we don't hear as often about the colleges run by sisters and Sisters College. And that was, of course, the Sisters College.
Well, it was. And one of the unique things about it was that if a community had a teacher with a doctorate, you got X number of sisters that could go. And it was a bartering system for very high quality people that enabled us to have all of the variety.
No, I wish there needs to be a book on Marriott College. There really does. I think it was a marvelous experiment.
Great, thanks, Mary Ellen. Okay, we have two more hands raised. I've got Kathy and Mary Ann, and then I think we'll cut it off there. So let's go to Kathy.
Okay. Well, thank you, as everyone else has said, for your wonderful presentation. I'm wondering what you feel about the future of women, religious, and resistance when it seems like the vocations we're seeing now are mostly in communities that are very closely aligned with the hierarchical church.
Well, I think some of the research that's been done shows that they're about the same number in conservative and more moderate communities, and the difference is that there are more of those communities, and so they're spread out more. The vocations in the not, let's say, the less traditional communities are more spread out. So I think that's one of the things. I think, though, one of the things we need to remember is that religious life has never been measured in terms of its value in quantitative terms, and that a few remarkable people can accomplish a remarkable amount. And so I think, you know, the early years of all of these communities were where there were a handful of 3 or 4 or 5 sisters living in an attic somewhere, impoverished, you know, wondering if they were going to, you know, be able to buy food for the next week. And I think we're moving back to that model of religious life. And I think if you ask if I ask any sister I know, regardless of her community, and I say, what inspires you about your history? What inspires you about your history? It's not when they had 50, 60 people entering a year. It's when they had those early women who had such tremendous vision and courage. So I think we're going back to that model. I really do.
I hope so, because I know that I'm an oblate for a Benedictine community, which amazing sisters who've done amazing things, but there's no vocations there. And it seems like what I see. Which
community of Benedictines is it, if I can ask?
Sacred Heart Monastery in Lisle, Illinois.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. So, but I just feel like, you know, obviously their community, they haven't had vocations for a while.
It's
but I just feel like, yeah, but do you see that? And I've worked a lot in different areas of the church, and it seems that where you see the vocations are, again, and not to conservative, liberal kind of thing, but it feels like communities that are more associated with the hierarchy, which I feel like
part of it is that they are accepting younger women perhaps with less formal education at this point, you know, they're and a lot of other communities are, you know, frankly, they're being a lot more rigorous in their selection, maybe even more rigorous than they used to be. Which is perhaps why some people ended up leaving religious life. Not because they were bad, but because they maybe should never have entered, or they entered for a time.
History is just so powerful of women religious and all that they've done. It's just.
Oh, obviously I agree with you.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Simon Schneider did give a remarkable talk. Or 10.
Yes, thanks, Kathy. As Peggy was just noting, I did stick a link into the chat there that has a link where you can see the video. There's also a transcript of Sister Schneider's really remarkable presentation on the future of religious life. Okay, let's see. Let's move on here to Mary Ann.
I was unable to hear your first presentation last week, and you had mentioned something about Mother Alfred Mose this time. Did you speak of her in your last presentation?
I did not. Oh. I did not, but I have mentioned her in some of what I've written. And
okay, just a really brief one.
Biography. Yeah. I've read her biography. She's an amazing woman.
Yeah, a very interesting woman who started 2 congregations.
And she was a member of a third.
I'm a member of the first one, Sisters of St. Francis of Mary Immaculate, which she founded in Joliet, Illinois.
Right.
And she was very forward. It was on the spot. Her motto was, where there was a need to fill it. So there was not a girls' academy or school in town. So she was going to build this academy. And the bishop in Chicago was not very kindly to women, religious especially. So he banned her from becoming a Reverend Mother again. So she went out to Rochester, where she had a place out there, you know, and he still was very adamant about her presence. And so he decided to split the congregation, gave them a date. People had to make up their minds, state their date, could not talk to anybody, who stayed in Joliet and who is going to follow Mother Alfred. Well, 27 sisters stayed in Rochester, and that was the beginning of their foundation in Rochester. Right. So we a very interesting history, and she, she found the need, and she told the Mayo brothers that if you, I'll build a hospital if you staff it, and that was due to the tornado that ravaged the town.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah, so that's our Mother Alfred on the move.
I just will answer that. There's a brief question in the chat about communities that are taking married members and men and so forth. And I think a lot of communities are doing that. They're calling them associates. They're calling them oblates. And so there are a lot of congregations that are actually opening their membership to, it's not full membership, but it is membership and to women who are married, to women who are single, to men, to non-Catholics in some cases. So I think that that's another model for the future. So thank you for mentioning that. And I think we have one more hand. Can we?
Yeah, we do have one more hand.
More
are you good? Yep.
I'm fine. I'm fine.
Okay. I believe it's Soraya. I'll.
Right. Hi, Soraya. You're still muted.
Yes, I know. Oh, thank you so much. I am a Muslim woman, but I like a lamb. I like lamb following Mary. I follow the Catholic women because I still feel I work in the margins. So I meet women, in my work, and I still feel, when I was 13, I went to the local mosque and I was told I couldn't pray there. So nothing much has changed for Muslim women. At least I feel you are more privileged in that sense. You can pray together.
Well, you have such marvelous pioneering Muslim women as well. I mean,
yes.
So
yes. Listening to you, that's what I thought. I need to compile that list to advocate stronger. Yes.
I would love to see that list.
Yes. And what touched me was when you with that quote about employing theologically what promotes the flourishing of women in all their diversity, but by Elizabeth Johnson was profound. There's great meaning and depth to me. So how do you see a world where we can come together, women of all faiths, because freedom of religion has always trumped gender discrimination?
I think, in the aftermath of September 11th in Syracuse, New York, a Methodist woman called the local masjid and said, I don't know any Muslim women, but it's impossible to hate people that you know personally. So please, could you put me in touch with some Muslim women? And between them, they founded an organization called Women Transcending Boundaries, which still exists over 20 years later, of women of all faiths who come together once a month and who do work in the community, but who also just talk and get to know each other and realize that they have so much in common and so much to learn from each other. And I think we're seeing a lot of that. And somebody wrote in the chat, do I know Sister Lorena White, Franciscan Sisters of the Atonement? Do I know her? I've done research in their archives. It's a wonderful story. She is one of the few women who is actually acknowledged as a founder of the men's community as well as the women's community. And I have tremendous admiration for her. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Soraya, and thank you, Peggy, and thank you, everyone. This has just been
delightful. And again, my email address, I'm going to put in the chat again because it was on the first slide. If you want to carry on the conversation, feel free to email me.
You can quiz Peggy on her knowledge of random women religions.
Random communities
and I bet she's got it. So
but I always want to learn more. And so I really do. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Your knowledge is so deep and we're so grateful for your sharing of it.